Who's Your Mummy by R.L. Stine, Book 6 in the HorrorLand series, Chapter 11. I turned away. I couldn't bear to watch. Didn't Uncle Jonathan hear the man's screams? Gripping the drape in my fists, I leaned to the window and saw the man running away. He'd left his overcoat behind on the grass, like a present to the bats. He was racing full speed down the hill, waving his arms wildly as he ran. The bats swooped high above his head and circled him, following him down the hill. They didn't dive or attack. It was like they just wanted to make sure he didn't come back. I let go of the drape. My hands were ice cold. My teeth were chattering. I straightened my nightshirt and ran out into the dimly lit hall. "Uncle Jonathan!" I screamed. "Uncle Jonathan!" I gazed up and down the hall. Where was his bedroom? After a few seconds, I heard the clumping sound of running footsteps. Sanja came trotting around the corner, fastening her robe as she ran. "Sanja, a man outside," I choked. She wrapped me in a hug. Her cheeks were hot. She smelled of a flowery perfume. "Are you okay? Oh, my soul, you're shivering. Are you okay?" She kept repeating the words. "Yes, but the man," I stammered. "I saw him out my window. It was horrible. The bats. You weren't harmed?" She petted my hair. "Shh, shh, take a deep breath. I'll say a little prayer of thanks. Sanja." I was starting to calm down, but I couldn't get the picture out of my mind of those bats biting and scratching and screeching. "The bats attacked the man. I watched." She raised a finger to her lips. "Sometimes strangers come wandering up the hill," she said in a whisper. "The bats like to protect the house. Upon my faith, child, they always chase the intruders away." "But it was so frightening," I said, "the way the bats swooped all over him." Her dark eyes locked on mine. "The man learned a lesson tonight. He will know not to return," she whispered. She wrapped a heavy arm around my shoulders and led me back to my room. "Climb into your warm bed," she said. "I'll tuck you in." She smoothed my hair as I climbed under the bedspread. "Sleep tight now," she whispered. "By my heart, you will not be harmed here." She tugged the spread under my chin. I watched her tiptoe from the room. I could still smell her strong, flowery perfume. My head sank into the soft pillow. I shut my eyes, but I knew it would take a long time to fall asleep. My heart was racing in my chest, and I could still hear the flapping of bat wings outside the window. As the bat noises finally faded, another sound rose up nearby. Once again, I heard the low moans and groans. So close, on the other side of the wall. The eerie, frightening moans rising and falling. Was I imagining it? Was I hearing wrong? For a moment, I thought I heard words, a low chanting rising from the sad moans. The same words repeated over and over. "I want to die, I want to die, I want to die." Chapter 12. The next morning, I hurried down to the kitchen in my nightshirt. My hair was a tangled mess, but I didn't care. I was eager to ask Jonathan about the bats and the evil-looking man and the groans and moans and everything. Peter already sat at the breakfast table, spooning up a big bowl of cereal. He had milk over his chin. He gave me a wide, open-mouthed grin so I could see the chewed-up mush in his mouth. Jonathan had both hands wrapped around a tall white mug of coffee. He smiled when he saw me enter the kitchen and motioned to the empty chair opposite of him. "Peter, did you sleep?" I asked. He nodded. "Didn't you hear the bats or the man screaming or anything?" He shook his head and kept shoveling cereal into his mouth. "You're crazy," he said, dribbling milk over his chin back into the bowl. "No, she isn't," Jonathan interrupted. He turned to me. "Abby, I'm so sorry about last night. Sanja told me everything. I really do apologize. Your first night here and it turned into something of a nightmare." "It was totally frightening," I said. "I saw the bats and—" Jonathan reached across the table and patted my hand. "I'm so sorry. Let me explain. I keep a bat cave under the house. The bat is one of the creatures that I study." Sanja set a plate of scrambled eggs and bacon in front of me. I thanked her, but I wasn't ready to eat breakfast. I still had a lot of questions for Uncle Jonathan. "There was a man on the lawn," I started. Jonathan nodded. "As you saw, my house is a target for thieves," he said. "It's only natural. I have so many valuable objects." He took another long drink of coffee, then he wiped his mustache with his napkin. Sandra told me you were frightened by that intruder last night, he said. I don't want you to worry, Abby. This house is safe from anyone who tries to get in. Your eggs are getting cold, Sandra said, standing at the kitchen door. I picked up my fork and began to eat. I was starting to feel better. I started to ask my next question, but Peter interrupted me. Can we go into the village? He asked Jonathan. My iPod is broken. I think I need a new one. Jonathan frowned at Peter. I don't think we can go into town today, he said. My work is keeping me much too busy. Besides, you won't find a store in this tiny village that sells any kind of electronics. I have to buy everything I need by mail. Snail mail? Peter said. That's lame. You mean you don't have an internet hookup here? Jonathan started to respond, but the phone rang. He left the room to answer it. Peter, you have to be a better guest, I whispered. It's not very nice to tell Jonathan that the way he does things is lame. Not what I meant, Peter mumbled. He shot a spoonful of his cereal milk across the table at me. It dripped down the front of my nightshirt. Thanks a lot, I said. How did you get to be such a pain? I learned everything I know from my big sister, he said. Funny dude. I finished breakfast and hurried up the stairs to my room. Bright sunlight poured through the window. The sky was clear and blue. I changed into jeans and a bright yellow tank top. Then I sat down at the dressing table to brush my hair. Talk about luxury. Can you imagine having your own dressing table? It was all gold and marble, with a soft little bench in front of it and a tall mirror in the back. I raised the brush to my hair, stroked it through once, twice. Something felt wrong. My hair gets pretty tangled at night, but it doesn't take long to fix it. But this morning something was definitely strange. I leaned forward and brought my face close to the mirror. I turned my head to see the side. No, impossible. A chunk of my hair had been cut off. I didn't want to believe it. I raised some of my hair in one hand and brought it close to the mirror. I squinted hard, but no amount of wishing would bring it back. I had to face the truth. A big chunk of hair, gone. Who would do that to me? I let the hairbrush fall from my lap. Stunned, I stared at myself in the mirror, gazed into the sunlight reflected on the glass, and tried to think clearly. I heard soft footsteps behind me. Before I could turn, I was stabbed in the back. I let out a scream, felt the prickle of pain spread. I spun around and shook Cleopatra off me. She tumbled to the floor, landed on her back, but instantly stood up and stared at me with those bright olive eyes. Ow, I said, trying to rub my back. But I couldn't reach the spot that hurt. You evil cat, can't you just stay off me? And then I saw my water blaster on the side of the dressing table and remembered I'd filled it full last night. Aha, revenge is mine, I cried. I grabbed the blaster, spun it around, and gave the black cat a good soaking from head to foot. I laughed and waited for Cleopatra to turn and run. But no. The cat didn't move. The color faded from her eyes. Her ears drooped. Her head appeared to sag. As I stared in horror, pieces of the cat dropped to the floor. The tail crumpled to dust. The eyes rolled out. The head crumpled and fell off the body. In seconds, I was gaping at a pile of black powder. The cat had disintegrated into a dry mound of ashes at my feet. Chapter 13. I pressed my hands to my face and let out a cry. As I looked at the dark ashes, wave after wave of panic swept over me. My stomach lurched. I shut my eyes and spun away from it. This is wrong. This is horribly wrong, I cried in a trembling voice. I sucked in a deep breath and took off. Peter! Hey, Peter! I shouted as I hurtled down the long, dimly lit hall. My shoes thudded on the hard floor. I stopped at Peter's open doorway. We've got to get out of here, I screamed. He was sprawled on his bed reading a manga book. His open laptop was on the floor beside the bed. There were clothes strewn everywhere. Excuse me? He glanced up from his comic. What's your problem, Abby? We've got to get out of this house, I cried breathlessly. We've got to find Uncle Jonathan. Let's tell him Granny V called and she needs us back. Peter sat up, yawning. You're joking, right? I ran into the room, grabbed him by the arm, and pulled him to his feet. Listen to me. Something is very wrong here, I said. The cat, Cleopatra. What a totally creepy cat, Peter said. Not anymore, I said. I handed him his sneakers. I squirted her with my water blaster, and she fell apart. I mean, she totally fell to pieces. His eyes went wide. You mean you killed her? I just squirted her, and she crumbled to ashes. I said, hurry, put on your shoes. We can't stay here. He finally believed me. He pulled on his sneakers and followed me into the hall. How are we going to get away? He asked. I think the train comes every day, I said. We'll just tell Jonathan we're needed back home, and he'll drive us to the train station. But shouldn't we call Granny V? Peter asked in a tiny voice. Later, I said. First, let's get out of this house. We took the stairs 2 at a time. We searched the front rooms, the den, the kitchen, and dining room. No sign of Jonathan or Sanja. Uncle Jonathan? Peter cupped his hands around his mouth and shouted his name. Where are you? Peter's voice echoed down the hall, but no reply. Let's try his bedroom, I said. We scrambled back up the stairs, running side by side down the hall. His bedroom door was open just a crack. Uncle Jonathan, are you in here? I called. No answer. Uncle Jonathan? I pulled open the door. The wind was blowing and brown curtains at the window. He had draped a black jacket over a tall stone sculpture of a sphinx. The bed was unmade. The blanket lay crumpled on the floor. He's not here, Peter muttered. Seconds later, we found ourselves at the dark wooden door at the end of the hall, Jonathan's private quarters. I reached my hand up to knock, but Peter pulled it down. We're not allowed to go in there, remember? This is an emergency, I said. I pounded on the door with my fist. No answer. I grabbed the doorknob, turned it, and pushed the door open. I poked my head in. A strong odor greeted my nose. Smells like a doctor's office, Peter whispered. We stepped into a huge room with high ceilings and a dark red wallpaper. Bright sunlight poured in through a row of tall windows. I waited for my eyes to adjust to the bright light, and then I gasped. Are these all mummy cases? Peter grabbed my hand. This is awesome, he whispered. There must be dozens of them. Think there's a mummy in every case? I stared at the 3 long rows of cases all lined up perfectly. They filled the room. I don't know, I murmured. This is totally freaking me out. I took a step and then stopped. A low moan rose from the nearest mummy case. I heard a sigh, another moan, a long groan, as if the mummies were alive. My breath caught in my throat. My chest felt tight, as if I were about to explode from fright. Last night I heard the moans through my bedroom wall. I never dreamed they were coming from living mummies. Or was someone or something else living in these coffin-like cases? I turned to leave. I had to get out of there. But Peter spun me around. Look, Abby, he pointed. A door across the room, slightly open. Was Uncle Jonathan back there? Questions flashed in my mind. What kind of work did he do in here? Why did he have these mummies hidden away? I didn't want to know the answers. I just wanted to get out of the house. Peter and I crept past the rows of mummy cases. The moans and groans rose up on both sides of us, but I kept my eyes on the floor and didn't turn my head. I didn't want to see them. We stepped up to the door and peered inside. The room was brightly lit. It looked sparkling clean, with white walls and a white ceiling. I saw electronic equipment lined up against the back wall, metal tables, oxygen tanks. It looked kind of like a hospital operating room. I jerked my head back when I saw Jonathan. He stood behind a long metal table. He was leaning over a mummy. The mummy was on its back. Its arms hung over the sides of the table. Carefully, I peeked back into the room. Jonathan had his head down. He didn't see Peter and me. I didn't breathe. I didn't move. I stared in disbelief at my uncle as he leaned over the mummy. His eyes were wild. His face was red with excitement. He tugged up his shirt sleeves, shook his hands as if shaking off water. He slowly, carefully began to unwrap the ancient bandages. Then he dug his hand into the mummy's belly. He dug both hands in deep and pulled out a glistening dark purple organ. A kidney? A liver? Oh, sick, I moaned. And then I watched him raise the disgusting wet mummy guts to his mouth and started to eat them.